Causes of the War of 1812. Previously, we learned that the United States bought Louisiana territory, the area, from the French in 1803 for $15 million. This doubled the size of the United States for about 3 cents an acre. So looking closely here, we have what some maps claim is Louisiana Purchase. Of course, in 1803, at least one map in the United States had a little bit different view because, again, everyone knew the Louisiana Purchase included New Orleans from the French and it included the Mississippi River, but exactly how far north did it go? Exactly how far west did it go? Nobody knew. And that was to raise a few problems in the years to come. Especially when, as you notice, this map includes the nice yellow part of the Louisiana Purchase area, includes all the way up to British Canada and all the way through Spanish Texas, which might present a few problems with the British and Spanish. But nevertheless, it was a great deal. So let's look at the winners and losers of Louisiana Purchase. And the big winners, of course, were the United States. A really big winner. You double the size of the country for just a small price. And of course, as we'll see, the Louisiana area is going to form, parts of almost 20 states. And it's going to have numerous resources that will help make the United States a very wealthy, powerful nation. So it's really awesome for the United States. It's really awesome for Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson is seen now as a national hero. Of course, he was pretty popular even in his first year in office because, after all, he's a Democratic Republican, and Democratic Republicans basically the party of farmers, and 9 out of 10 Americans are farmers. And he had, of course, cut the size of the Army and Navy and fired some tax collectors. But then he buys Louisiana from the French. Despite his sort of previous strict interpretation of the Constitution, he changes his mind and approves the purchase anyway, and Congress quickly approves the money. And he becomes sort of a legend, a national hero. But you know what? John Adams, the previous president, is also a big winner. So John Adams, sometimes overlooked by people. Washington's a well-known figure. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson's a well-known figure. Adams comes right in between. He's the second president of the United States. He's a Federalist. Of course, most people sort of cascade him or are negative towards him because of his support of the Alien Sedition Acts, which violated freedom of speech and freedom of the press. And at the time, it split the Federalist Party in two, which really allowed the DRs to win the election of 1800. And of course, that really angered his fellow Federalists. And so the DRs never really liked, of course, Adams. And after the Federalist Party split, a lot of Federalists didn't like Adams. However, having said that, even, of course, his previous work, as far back as defending the soldiers in the Boston Massacre case, to his work in the Continental Congress, in his work in the Articles of Confederation period, and his support for George Washington, really show that Adams was a very capable person. But one thing people often forget is that during the Adams administration, when the French were seizing our ships going to England, many Americans wanted war, especially after the XYZ affair, in which apparently the French government wanted bribes, and even to talk about peace, most Americans wanted war. Of course, a war, the DRs were in favor of France, and the Federalists were against France, were in favor of England. So a war would have been very popular with the Federalists, and anybody supporting France during the war would have looked like a traitor, which means the other political party looks like a traitors. So politically, it would have been a wise move to go to war with France, and you'd have tons of support, and you'd probably win the presidency again. But Adams recognized, just like Washington, that the United States wasn't really ready for a war. That would not be in the national interest. Certainly, if they went to war, probably Jefferson probably would have been elected to a second term. Probably the Federalists would still be in power in Congress. And Jefferson realized that when he sent over another peace negotiator, if peace worked out, that probably the Federalist Party was going to be a loser, that probably he was not going to be the next president of the United States again. But he put his country above his own political ambitions. He put his country above his political party. And as far as history is concerned, there have been very few people that have done that put their own political future and their own future above, below the future of the United States. That is, what's good for the United States, they raised up, and even though they knew that was going to hurt them personally. And certainly, when you think of politicians and thinking of what they would do, almost always it's for their political party or for their political interest. But Adams put the United States above all that. And because he sent over the second negotiator, America continued with peace with France. There was no war between France and America. There was peace. So in 1803, when Napoleon had to sell this area, certainly, he wanted to sort of sell it to the United States so he might get the United States involved in a war with Britain or maybe Spain or something like that. But the odds of him selling Louisiana to the United States, if the United States and France had just been fighting a war with each other, is really, really low. It probably would not have happened at all. So because Adams keeps the peace at the cost of his own job, at the cost of the Federalist Party, he sets the foundation of the Louisiana Purchase that doubles the size of the United States overnight and helps eventually make the United States a superpower. So Adams really is a big winner. And of course, we could only hope for more politicians that put the interest of all Americans above themselves and their political party. Now, the big losers, incidentally, was basically everybody else. Okay, losers. In 1803, the United States did not have $15 million to give to France. So where did the United States get $15 million? It's simple. It sold bonds. It sold IOU, government IOUs. And who bought those IOUs? Most of them were bought by British banks and British treasury institutions. So basically, British banks, the British, bought $15 million of our bonds, of our IOUs. We took that $15 million and gave it to Napoleon. Napoleon takes that $15 million and starts a war against Britain. So the British finance a war against themselves. International money, it's an interesting field. Of course, France is also a big loser. Because the war they start, they lose big time. The war they start, Napoleon loses, and eventually Napoleon would be captured and exiled into a little island in the South Atlantic somewhere till his dying days. And the French Revolution sort of is put down, and a new French king is put in its place. Another big loser, the Indians in this area. Because up until this time, the Indians always had someone who helped them against a powerful growing United States. So originally, for example, the French had claimed this area, and there were French traders here, and they traded with the Indians. But the French, when they came to your Indian village, they came, they traded, and they left. As opposed to Americans who might come to your village, who came, they traded, they stayed, they took your land, they kicked you off your land. So the Indians really appreciated the French, but now the French are no longer going to be there to protect the Indians. Now this whole area is a growing, expanding United States, and that's of course going to be a real negative for the Indians in the future. So winners and losers. Okay. Having said that, during this time period, Jefferson is also working on other problems. And one of the problems is pirates. Pirates in North Africa, called the Barbary pirates, barbarians. So during this time period, as the United States becomes a new country, pirates are seizing our ships. So in North Africa, you have a sort of a series of sort of nation states. And of course, you look at the map there and you see sort of the big areas that are mapped out. But in reality, even though those areas were claimed, for example, by Tripoli, or they were claimed by Morocco or whatever, most of that area was desert area. So really, the most inhabitants of that area lived along the coast and in a very few cities. And those people needed, well, some money. And agriculture, well, if most of your land is desert, it's going to be really hard to grow food to sell to other people, because if you grow food, you have to feed it to yourself and your friends, and then there's none left over to sell to anyone else. So the people of this area decided to, well, make money another way. They became pirates. They seized other people's ships at seas and then held those ships and those crews for ransom. That's how they made their money. And they were very successful pirates. In fact, the Barbary pirates even went as far as Iceland in the 1647, I think, around that area, time period. Ships appeared off Iceland, and they were from North Africa. They were from these pirates, and these pirates raided Ireland, for example, and brought back stuff they had stolen, also brought back people they had stolen and made them into slaves and sold them as slaves. Same way as North Africa raided Ireland. They raided the British coast. Not only did they take people's stuff, they also took people and basically made them into slaves. And at first, by the way, by the 1700s, the British Navy was powerful enough to protect its ships. And because at first America was part of Great Britain, our ships that sailed the Mediterranean were basically protected by the British Navy. But as you know, then we declared independence. But for a few years, because we were allied with France, the French warships protected our ships. But then, as we become a constitutional republic, no one protects our ships. And so American ships are being seized by these pirates. And they take the crew and basically make them into slaves. They put them in hard labor. They take the boat. Sometimes they use the boat themselves to make more pirate ships. Sometimes they sell the boat and the cargo and the crew back to the nation they took them from. Sometimes they just take the cargo off the ship and sell it to Europe. But these are very profitable, productive pirates in this area. So eventually the Jefferson administration works out an agreement with the pirates. And for a time, the pirates stop attacking our ships. But then, basically just as Jefferson's taking office, the pirates in Tripoli hear that Americans have paid the pirates of Morocco and Algiers a little bit of money that they haven't paid the pirates of Tripoli. And that really angers the king of Tripoli, and he declares war against the United States. And he declares war in their typical fashion. He goes to the American embassy in Tripoli and he chops down their flagpole, which is a declaration of war. And then Tripolian pirates start seizing our ships. So at first, Jefferson reacts by sending over basically our entire Navy. All 3 ships. because remember, Jefferson, in order to cut taxes and save money, has reduced the size of the Navy. So the American Navy arrives, but the Tripoli is a really fortified city, really big fortified city. It has about 25,000 soldiers inside. It has about 150 cannons. And so basically all the American ships can do is sort of patrol outside to try to stop the pirate ships from leaving. But in one of those patrols, one of those American ships, the Philadelphia, runs aground and is captured by the pirates, who then take the ship and use it as sort of a pirate ship, but also take the crew and put them in prison and basically make them slaves. Of course, that's pretty embarrassing to have one of your naval ships captured by pirates. So eventually Jefferson asks for more money, and they send over a bigger fleet of, well, 6 American ships. And these 6 American ships are sort of able to sort of sail off the coast and prevent the pirates from leaving Tripoli. And in one instance, the Americans actually managed a surprise attack on the Philadelphia that's been captured by the pirates and basically sort of burn that ship up, but are unable to rescue the crew. And so the American ships are off the coast blockading the pirate ships, but of course that doesn't get your men back. It doesn't get anything back. All it does is to stop the pirates for a while. So the Americans come up with a plan. They decide to invade Tripoli. They decide to attack Tripoli. So the commander of the expedition sends in the U.S. Marines. Of course, the Marines, best known today, were actually designed to sort of guard our ships, but they also became a land force. And in this case, they were a land force. They were going to invade Tripoli. So all the Marines, all 9 of them, get off the ship in Egypt. And the 9 Marines are going to go across the desert and attack Tripoli from the rear. It's just a great story. You know, you're going to fight an entire country, and you have basically 9 Marines, a lieutenant, and basically 8 other Marines. That's awesome. But the Marines do have something going for them. They have money. So when they're in Egypt, they basically buy some mercenaries. They buy people with guns, say, hey, come along with us. We're invading your neighbor. And eventually they get about 500 of these mercenary troops, and they march across the coast to Derna, which is the 2nd largest city in the nation of Tripoli. And there at Derna, the Marines and their friends, 500 Marines, break through the city walls and basically kill about 800 of the pirates and capture and wound about 1,200 others of them. At which point the pirate brother, the brother of the pirate king, who is in Darna, surrenders the city. And by the way, during this battle, all 9 Marines are injured and wounded. But the brother then is going to be used by the Marines. The Marines are going to now march a sort of motley crew of 500 across the desert to the city of Tripoli, attack him from the rear, and going to place the brother on the throne. The brother's going to become the king, and then he's going to order the release of all Americans. But as they start marching, the king of Tripoli says, this is a serious threat. And he decides to settle up with the Americans. So he promises not to attack American ships again. However, the Americans do pay him $30,000, $60,000 as a ransom for the Americans that are still in his jail. Basically because, again, the city of Tripoli is a really fortified city with big walls around it. So probably even if the 9 Marines and their 500 friends had actually gotten there, they might not have been able to break in. So the United States frees its citizens, and the American ships sail away back to America. And eventually, when they write a song about the Marines get a song. From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we are proud to be the U.S. Marines. There you go. Unfortunately, the next problem is not as easy to solve. So Jefferson sent the Navy to fight the Barbary pirates in North Africa and won. However, the next group seizing ships, a little bit tougher to deal with. So the British Navy, of course, is seizing our ships going to France, and the French Navy is seizing our ships going to Britain. And remember now, because originally we had worked out a treaty both with England, Jay's Treaty, and with France to stop attacking our ships under Washington Adams. But then comes the Louisiana Purchase, and now Napoleon has more money. Now there's another war starting in Europe, and now it's the same process over again. The French are seizing our ships going to Britain, and the British Navy is seizing our ships going to France. And within just a few years, the British seized like 400 of our ships. And that really angers Americans. Of course, it's a big ocean, but the British have a lot of ships. They have, I think, 130 ship of the lines, which means that those are top-notch warships which have 100 or 130 cannons on board. Then they have like 600 lesser warships that might have, anywhere from 80 cannons, 50 cannons, 20 cannons on board, which of course is a lot larger than the American Navy. But besides taking our ships, the British are also impressing and seizing our American sailors because they need sailors. So again, the British have a lot of warships, over 700, and the biggest one, a ship of the line with over 100 cannons, probably takes 800 to 1,000 people simply to operate the ship. So you need a lot of sailors to operate a fleet of 700 ships. And unfortunately, the Navy is not very popular in England because conditions on board Navy ships are terrible. Basically, you serve for life until you get really old and can't serve anymore. Second of all, the food is terrible because you're at sea for so long. Now, originally when the ship leaves, it has some fresh vegetables and things like that, but when the ships leave, after a couple of weeks, all that good stuff is gone, all the fresh stuff is gone, and now you're eating hardtack, which is basically like a biscuit, except the biscuits grow so sort of stale that they're really hard. In fact, they were known that when you bite down into one, it could break your teeth if you broke down too hard. So people basically dipped it in water or some liquid to try to soften it up. That's fine meal. And basically you had that almost, 3 times a day. That was your meal. And sleeping conditions were terrible. You're basically down below deck. You're on a hammock. It's not your hammock because there's so many sailors on board. You share that hammock with others. While you're on duty, someone's sleeping in the hammock, and then when you get off duty, you come and say, "Hey, it's time for your duty," and they get up and they go to the hammock. Of course, especially in rough seas, it's really hard to sleep. Medical care is primitive, to say the least. Of course, at this time, they sort of found a remedy for scurvy, and so they try to have like oranges and lemons aboard so you can get enough vitamins. So basically, your teeth don't all fall out and you die and stuff like that. Good stuff. But oftentimes, wounds are treated with cutting off your arm or leg. And of course, there's no like nice medicine to make you sleep while there are doctors operating all the time. Work is very dangerous, even in peacetime. You're climbing those huge masts, you're climbing up those big masts that hold the sails, and there's no safety rope or whatever. If you fall off the ship, you fall to the deck, you fall to your death. And then that's just in peacetime. Of course, in wartime, the nice enemy shooting at your ship, which means the cannonball hits against the side of your ship, and inside the wood splits, and there's like splinters flying everywhere. And you get splinters stuck in your skin. You get splinters stuck in your eyes. It's just a terrible way of life. And so during this time period, when British ships were sailing close to America, and the British warships, because they were far away from Britain, often stopped in ports like Boston, for example, to get resupplied. But the problem was, when the ship got close enough to Boston, many of the crew would jump overboard and swim to America to get out of the British Navy. And when those British sailors get to America, they need a job. And the only job they know is sailing. And so they get a job on American merchant ships. But American merchant ships carrying cargo are a lot better than the British Navy. They have a lot better food. The sleeping conditions are better. The work is a little less dangerous. And if you don't like that ship when you get back, you get off that ship. You don't ever have to return. You get paid for your services in the American Merchant Marine, unlike in the British Navy, where supposedly they pay you, but basically they take out money for food and everything. So basically, by the time they're finished taking out money, you get paid nothing. So many of these British sailors had joined the American Merchant Marine, our cargo ships, and that's why oftentimes the British Navy, because they needed a sailor who would stop an American ship, American cargo ship, and the British captain would come on board with some British Marines, and they would look for these people that had been part of the British Navy, who are now claiming to be American citizens and legally are American citizens, except for the fact the British don't recognize they're American citizens. So under British law, once a Briton, always a Briton. It's not like you can ever get away from it. You can't like change nationalities. And so the British captain would come aboard, and he would have you talk, and if you sounded British, they would take you away. Unfortunately, the British needed so many men on their warships. Sometimes they weren't too picky about who they chose. Sometimes it didn't matter how you spoke or whether had always been an American, always been born in America. If they needed you, they would take you by force. And of course, what can your captain do about it? Nothing, because you're a merchant ship. You have no cannons to defend yourself with. So unfortunately, you would find yourself in the Royal Navy. Now, technically, the Royal Navy never claimed to be able to take Americans off the ship, but they did a lot. And so theoretically, you could get your freedom. If somebody back home, like say your parents heard you, been taken, your parents could hire a lawyer at their expense, go to court at their expense, and the lawyer could, file papers and affidavits that said you're an American citizen that had been born there at your parents' expense. And then the judge would rule in your favor that you're an American citizen. And then they would send the papers to the Navy Department in Washington, D.C. at your parents' expense. And then those papers would be sent across the ocean at your parents' expense. And then they would arrive at the British Navy. Then basically a British judge would look at them and basically declare that they were legal. And then the British Navy would start a search for you. And then if they found you, then you'd basically be sent home at your parents' expense. But the search could take years. And more often than not, you're going to be dead by the time all that stuff happens. So it's really during these years, from as you can see, right before the War of 1812, over 6,000 Americans were kidnapped or impressed into service, were made to join the Royal Navy. And of course, that's really going to anger Americans. Besides all that, the British are also supplying guns to the Indians, and the Indians use these guns to attack Americans. British Canada is just to the north of us, and so it's really easy for the Indians simply to cross the border and bring furs to trade, and they trade the furs for guns, and of course then the Indians would take the guns and use those to kill American settlers in the Northwest Territory area. Of course, the British would say, we're not responsible for that. We're just trading. It's the Indians that are responsible. But still, Americans are being killed with British guns. And there's many cartoons in American papers about that, that shows basically Indians basically scalping and killing Americans, and basically, there they are, handing the scalp over to those British soldiers in Canada, and naturally, this is going to really anger Americans. Of course, one of the Indians that really angers Americans is a guy named Tecumseh. Tecumseh is a Shawnee Indian who's going to try to unite the Indians to stop U.S. expansion. So the Shawnees, as you can see, sort of live in Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky area. And Tecumseh's idea is basically to unite, for example, Seminoles in Florida, the Choctaws in what we now know as Mississippi and Alabama, the Cherokees in what we now know as Georgian and Tennessee, and Miami Indians up north, and basically sort of form a wall of Indians that the United States will not be able to get by. So basically he's trying to create one big Indian nation in order to stop U.S. expansion, in order to keep Indian lands. And naturally, of course, the United States government is not really keen on this plan. And the attacks continue. As the attacks continue, Tecumseh is, of course, getting supplied by the British. At one point in 1811, Tecumseh goes down south to try to work with the Choctaws to get them involved in his Indian Nation scheme. Meanwhile, the governor of the Indiana Territory, that Northwest Territory area, says, you know, these Indians they have told me they're not going to stop attacking us. They told me they're going to be dealing with the British. They're now our enemies. And so William Henry Harrison gets together about 1,000 men, many of them militiamen, about 800 militiamen, some regular United States forces. And his plan is to march up and attack Prophetstown, where Tecumseh's headquarters is. So Prophetstown is called Prophetstown because that's where the prophet is. So the prophet is Tecumseh's brother. So as the story goes, several years earlier, Tecumseh's brother, was going around the campfire and whatever, and then all of a sudden he fell down in sort of an epileptic seizure. And when he got better, he says, "I've had a vision. The Great Spirit, that is God, has come to me and has told me that what my brother's doing is good. That we need to unite against these white men. That we need to unite into one big Indian nation, and we need and Tecumseh's brother, the prophet, says, God is not pleased with us. This is why we've lost so much land already. See, because we're acting like the white man. We're trading and we're using the white man's guns, and we're using we're cooking the white man's pots, their metal pots, and we're dressing like them and stuff like that. No, God has told me that we're supposed to be Indians. That we need to go back to the old ways. We need to dress like Indians and act like Indians and eat like Indians and stuff like that. That's why we've lost all this land. We need to go back to the old ways. So that's why he's called the prophet. And that sort of thinking is not unique to Tecumseh or his brother or that time period. People today say, "Oh, I remember back in the good old days." Yeah, the good old days when everything was just perfect. Everyone got along. Everyone loved to go to school, and everyone liked each other, and everyone was polite on the roadway, and everyone was a honest person. And of course, there was never such time. But the further you get away from maybe your younger years, and things start to change, you think about the good old days. And so that's a very powerful call. That's a very powerful message that things are going badly, but if you go back to the old ways, things will get better. And so that's why the prophet was called the prophet. Now, the prophet might have been a great prophet, but he was not a great military leader. So when he hears that William Henry Harrison is coming his way with 1,000 men, he gathers his 1,000 warriors. Prophet gathers the 1,000 warriors that's in Tecumseh's village. Now, Tecumseh is away on business down south. So the prophet's in charge. And the prophet gets his 1,000 warriors together and says, "Men, I've had a vision. God has told me we're going to have a great victory over this army that's coming up. And so, first of all, you need to put on this red paint because God has told me that using this paint, the bullet's going to bounce off of you. We're going to get a great victory. We're going to surprise these Americans, and we're going to fight them, and basically the bullets will just bounce off of us. It's awesome." So the next day, the prophet leads the Indian warriors in attacking the Americans. Two mistakes, I guess. One is, again, the prophet's not a great military leader. So instead of ambushing the Americans, that is, instead of hiding in the forest and basically attacking the Americans as they walk by, instead, basically the Indians come out in the open and basically walk across a field and attack Americans, which means Americans have notice, but they also, of course, are not ambushed. They're able to put all their firepower together and shoot down the Indians. The second thing that happens is, I know it's going to be hard to think about, but the bullets did not bounce off the Indians. The bullets went right through them, no matter what Tecumseh said. And so very shortly, his armies wiped out. The Americans move into Prophetstown and burn it to the ground. And as they're burning it to the ground, what do they find? They find British guns, which is just all the confirmation they need that these British from Canada are, they're the ones responsible for these Indians attacking us. So at the Battle of Tippecanoe, the Indians suffered a defeat. So the Battle of Tippecanoe, it was called Tippecanoe because it was by Tippecanoe Creek. And William Henry Harrison wins a great victory. In fact, so great that eventually one day he'll actually become president. And eventually one day when he runs for president, the vice president's going to be a guy named John Tyler. And the campaign motto, and many years later, is Tippecanoe and Tyler too. But nevertheless, it's not a good thing for the Indians because they lost. Meanwhile, in Congress, more and more congressmen are becoming war hawks that want to go war against Britain. In fact, they yell for war so much, that's how they get their name, war hawks. They go, war, 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 war. They sound like a hawk. And so they're called war hawks. They want to go to war against Britain because of all these things that are happening, but also because if you go to war against Britain, you can attack not only British ships, but anything that's British. Like, say, your next door neighbor, Canada. And because Britain owns Canada, the War Hawk says, we'll just move into Canada, take it over, and then say, hey, Britain, if you want Canada back, you have to stop attacking our ships, stop taking our sailors, and stop giving guns to the Indians. And even if Britain doesn't stop that, the War Hawk said, at least we'll get to Canada. We'll have a lot more land. And so Warhawks wanted to go to war against Britain to get Canada. So the three main causes of the War of 1812. One, the seizing of our ships by Britain. Two, the arming and seizing of our sailors as well. The arming of the Indians, that is giving guns to the Indians, and the attempt to acquire and get Canada. All lead to the War of 1812.